Today on Coffee and Crusade, suicidal empathy is a phrase that you may or may not have heard of, but it's killing America and it may get you killed as well. What can we do about it? We're going to talk about it. What does your situational awareness look like in public? Does it matter? Well, of course it does, and I'll explain why. Gun legislation continues to infringe upon fundamental rights, and New York has decided to demonize gun owners. Perhaps we should stigmatize being petty tyrant morons instead. And in this week's Is That Heresy, we'll talk about the latest pistol brace controversy, and this is not going to surprise you at all. All that and more on this week's Coffee and Crusade. Today is Friday, March 20th, 2026. Welcome to Invictus Templar. I'm Calvin Bryant, and this is Coffee and Crusade. Let's jump right in. Let's talk about suicidal empathy. If you're not familiar with this term, it's nothing more than the sum of its parts. It's the idea that at a certain point, empathy, unchecked empathy, becomes suicidal. America and much of Western civilization is either at the brink of or already in the grip of empathy that is only possible to describe as suicidal because it is, without any doubt, without any exaggeration, getting people killed. It's getting Americans killed. Now, let me lead with a disclaimer, more of a caveat. Some of what I'm going to say, and maybe even all of it, is going to upset people. And that's because there's some false notion of disproportionality or disproportionately impacting special groups of people. You might know what I mean. We're told all the time that if at any point anything you do or say, if it has a disproportionate impact on a specific group, you're sexist, racist, bigoted, homophobic, whatever, Nazi, something, something, all those labels. You're never supposed to talk about anything that might prompt anyone to question why a subset of people are doing a negative thing repeatedly. And if you do notice, then you're the bad guy, you're the problem. Interesting enough, you've probably seen the meme about crows and noticing things. And I was at the zoo a few weeks ago. They had a crow exhibit of all things, the American crow. And the little sign in front of the exhibit talked about how crows are so smart and they recognize patterns. And I just laughed because it's literally the meme. It says, when crows recognize patterns, they're smart if they do it. If I do it, then I'm racist or xenophobic. I'm, again, Hitler, Nazi, bigoted, et cetera, et cetera. Nevertheless, we're going to do some noticing today. So be prepared for some noticing. I'm not going to state it directly. I'll let you figure out the pattern yourselves. So come with me now. Let's go on this journey. Put your crow glasses on and let's dive in. There is what I would call an alarming trend, and many Americans are waking up to it. Multiple talking heads and personalities have begun to report on this. Some have done so to great effect. But I want to dive in and talk about the implications for you as an individual and why this matters for being a prepared citizen. And that topic is that our government, our elected officials, and the people who vote for them have suicidal levels of empathy directed towards violent criminal offenders. And this twisted and malicious, quote unquote, empathy, if you can even call it that, it's getting people killed every day in America. Let us start. Let's first recall the case of Irina Zarutska. Do you remember her? Back in February 2025, a woman named Irina Zarutska, 40-year-old immigrant from Ukraine, had fled the war in Ukraine, fled her homeland, and she was riding the light rail in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this should have been an ordinary trip home, and it ended in a horrifying act of violence. According to the investigation, and of course we saw it on video as well, a man named Carlos Brown attacked Zarutska on the train, fatally stabbed her. And immediately following the attack, Brown said, "I got that white B word." We'll censor ourselves for the sake of YouTube, but I'm sure you've probably seen the clip, right? The attack shocked the city, and it wasn't just because of its brutality, but because of what people learned about it afterwards. And that is that the suspect, DeCarlos Brown, was not someone who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Court records showed that he had a very lengthy criminal history, including multiple prior arrests and charges spanning several years. In fact, at the time of the attack, Brown had already been in and out of the criminal justice system repeatedly. Several of those cases were serious charges, and he had been released on multiple occasions. Now, one of the most controversial decisions came just a few weeks before the killing in January of 2025. Brown had been arrested again, and this time on misdemeanor charge related to the misuse of the 911 system. And instead of being held on bond, he was released on a written promise to appear. That's right. So a repeat criminal with a rap sheet, longer than my listener base here. He wrote a promissory note saying, "I promise that I will appear in court." Despite his prior arrests and everything on his rap sheet. So he walked out of custody without having to post bail. And this decision was made by a Mecklenburg County magistrate judge. We're about to see a few things that have to do with judges here that's going to make you question possibly uh, who are these people that are in the magistrate positions? I certainly have that question. Now, that moment became a flashpoint after the attack because many people began asking the same question, and that was why was someone with such a long record being released yet again and again and again? When the details came out, it fueled outrage across Charlotte and even the United States. Community members, including many residents of the very neighborhoods that were, are most affected by violent crime, they began speaking out. And the current concern wasn't simply about one judge or one decision. It was about a broader pattern, what people believed they were seeing. Repeat offenders cycling through the system, being released again and again until eventually someone innocent pays the price. And for many people, the Zaruska case became a tragic example of what can happen when risk assessments fail, when repeat offenders are treated as low risk, or when the system prioritizes release over public safety. But there's more to it than that. Critics argue that the justice system had many opportunities to intervene and prevent the outcome, and they're absolutely right. They could have done this halfway through the rap sheet instead of, leading to where it ended up with DeCarlos, with Brown. But they're missing something very important. The critics are missing something. The risk assessments, the rehabilitation efforts, the attempts to mitigate recidivism, they didn't just fail in this case or a select few others. Statistically, rehabilitation, preventing recidivism is near impossible. In fact, recent studies showed that if you were to permanently incarcerate every violent offender with 3 or more criminal offenses, and that's generous. That's 3, you heard me, 3 or more criminal offenses, you would eliminate somewhere, this is an estimate, somewhere between 95 and 98% of violent crimes. So you heard me correctly. To put it another way, if you locked up repeat offenders, you would statistically eliminate all but about 5% of violent crimes. You would be left with less than 10% of violent crimes in America if you permanently incarcerated the people who are repeat offending. There's a pattern here. In the aftermath, lawmakers proposed legislation which is commonly referred to as Irina's Law, and that proposal aims to tighten the rules around pretrial release for individuals with serious or repeat criminal histories, particularly those accused of violent crimes. Now, supporters say it's a necessary step, which of course it is, to prevent dangerous offenders from repeatedly cycling into the community, which is what we keep seeing, and the lack of oversight, which we again see, or in this case, it's not seen, there's no oversight. However, at the same time, the proposal has faced oppositions from a certain demographic of people who we will roll up into the category of criminal justice reform advocates, which is a cancer upon our country. And they argue that expanding pretrial detention could undermine bail reform. Yeah, good. And it could lead to unnecessary incarceration of low-level offenders. So what? So what if a low-level offender is incarcerated? Here's an idea. Don't offend. Don't commit crimes. So already, a couple minutes into this, we're trying to block a law or oppose a law to restrict violent offenders from getting out. Because what if it disproportionately affects people who are nonviolent offenders? Well, we got to have empathy. And our empathy, therefore, has to extend to people who are potentially going to commit murder or have committed other violent crimes but haven't quite gotten to murder yet. In all likelihood, these changes, Irina's law, it would have prevented her from being brutally stabbed in what is clearly a racially motivated murder. His words, right? I got that white B word after he stabbed her in the neck. That legislation, we are told, needs to be stopped because we have to have more empathy for people who might be disproportionately or unfairly affected by be putting in jail longer than what we feel is polite, and kind. How many chances should a violent repeat offender get before the system finally decides to protect the public? For me, it's 0 chances. Like, that's it. You did a violent crime. You showed you're willing to violently harm other people. That's it. Your chance is done. Because most people in society, myself and probably most people that anyone listening knows, don't go around violently assaulting people, right? But we're told to have empathy, to give them more chance. One more chance, just one more chance. We're always told one more chance. They just need one more chance, right? But cases like the killing of Irina Zarutska raise a question about the criminal justice system, and that was, why was a repeat offender released again and again? Sometimes, however, this problem shows up in a different place in the system. Sometimes the offender has already been convicted. The jury has heard the evidence. The crimes have been proven. And yet the system somehow allows the sentence to be dramatically reduced. One of the clearest examples of this comes out of Louisville, Kentucky. This was fairly recently. A judge named Tracy Davis and an offender named Christopher Thompson. Thompson was convicted of a series of extremely serious crimes, including kidnapping, robbery, sodomy, and sexual abuse. The judge that heard the case there was a recommended 65-year prison sentence based on the severity of the crimes, which 65 is too few. If you commit a string of violent crimes against a person, you've shown us that this was not like an accident. This was not like a crime of passion. You didn't just lose control and assaulted someone. No, kidnapped, robbed, sodomized, continued the kidnapping and sexual abuse. That's life in prison in a generous society. In a just society, that's public gallows, right? Bring back the gallows. You heard it now. If I ever run for office, bring back the gallows. Let's go. This is ridiculous. 65 years, though. So 65 years is what the jury said. The recommendation there matters because in the American justice system, the juries represent the community's voice in determining justice. When they recommend a sentence like that, it reflects the seriousness, or at least it's supposed to recommend the seriousness that the community views the offense. But then the case reached sentencing, and Judge Tracy Davis cut the sentence by more than half. In fact, she imposed 30 years, so less than half the 65 years recommended by the jury. And the decision immediately sparked controversy, as it should, and controversy is putting it lightly. Prosecutors publicly objected. The Kentucky Attorney General's office moved to appeal. They argued that this was a drastic deviation from the jury's recommendation, which it was. It undermined the sentencing process. It does. But what made this even more disturbing, according to it was reports from the courtroom, and then we actually got to hear it ourselves. So if you haven't heard the audio, you should go listen to this. But it was Thompson's behavior during the sentencing itself. Rather than showing remorse, which, by the way, remorse, taking responsibility and remorse, usually that's something that has to be considered when you're adjusting a sentence, right? That should all be taken into account. Rather than showing remorse, he repeatedly interrupted the proceedings. He used profanity at the judge. He even made threatening remarks towards the judge. He spoke over her and interrupted the judge repeatedly. And as she continued to talk to him about his sentencing, She tells him that he was the victim because he lived in our society, our culture. She posited that he was a victim of white society. So this man committed multiple felony crimes, violent felony crimes against an innocent woman. And it's because he grew up around white people, according to this judge. Um, that's insane, first of all. So back to the question about, or when I said that you'd be questioning how some of these people are judges, we should be questioning about how Davis is a judge. This is wild, right? According to the activist judge, the fact that Thomas grew up around white people means that she needs to have these wild levels of empathy and this unmitigated compassion, reducing his sentence by more than half. Um, Despite the fact that during this, again, don't take my word for it. Go listen to the audio. During the sentencing, as he's interrupting her, and he's telling, or she's telling Thompson, like, "Oh, you grew up in this society because the white people, and that's why that you sexually assaulted this woman, robbed her, and sodomized her. That's why you did this." And he says, "I don't care." He, I don't have the quote in front of me, but he's essentially saying, "I don't care. I would do it." He says, "I would do it again." He tells the judge, "I would do it to you." So he tells her that he would commit the crimes again. He doesn't care about the family. He says that. He says he doesn't care about the victim. He doesn't care about the justice system or the judge. And that he would do the same to the judge. She she sits there, and if you ever watched Archer, one of my favorite quotes from the cartoon show Archer is Mallory Archer. She says it a few different episodes. She's, "Be that as it may." So the judge is sitting there. He's like, "If I could get out of prison, I would sodomize you." And the judge is like, "Be that as it may, I'm still giving you 30 years instead of 65 because of your skin color, and there's white people, which are bad." So that's basically what she said. Was the gist of it. She said it slightly more tactful than that, but that's basically what she said. Um, and this isn't happening in isolation. So local officials in Louisville have already raised concerns about Judge Davis's use of what's called shock probation. And this is a legal mechanism that allows judges to release inmates early if they've served a portion of their sentence. And apparently, Davis has done dozens of shock probations over a very short period, like an unusually short period of time for the number of shock probations she's given, which raises questions about how often violent offenders are being released back into the community. Um, Now, again, the point here is not that judges should never show mercy. Judicial discretion exists for a reason, and every case has nuances, and there's times when the law needs flexibility. Um, Discretion only works if it's balanced with responsibility, though, especially when the crimes are violent, and especially when the jury has already weighed the evidence and recommended a severe sentence. Um, Judicial discretion was never meant to be a conduit for undeserved and suicidal empathy. It was never meant as a mechanism to advance social or political agendas. Interestingly enough, if you were, these might be deleted by now, but if you looked up Judge Davis's social media, I believe it is her Twitter, her X account, she had all kinds of posts about, being an activist judge, essentially, not calling herself activist, but talking about how, as a judge, her responsibility is equity and helping people of color. So, according to this judge, if you look at what she said in the courtroom about him being a victim of just existing around white people, which means he should serve less than half the system, half the punishment, the sentence. And then, seeing that she has a record of releasing people early with no discernible reason at all, she just does it. And then her social media was previously littered with posts about helping people who are just not white. If you're not white, she was there to help you, which is insane. Flip that in reverse and just imagine if someone was out there saying, imagine I'm a judge, and I was to say, like, "Oh yes, if you're a white person and you committed a crime, that's okay because you're white, and therefore I feel bad for you because you just lived around people who weren't white. You lived around people of color, and therefore it's okay if you want to stab people. We're gonna let you out early. It's all right because you know those people of color had it coming." would there be a lynch mob outside my? Yes, there would be. There would be a mob outside my house. There would be riots if a white judge was saying that the mitigating circumstance is the fact that your race. Like that's is insane. This is not how the justice system was ever meant to work. It's not meant to work that way. It doesn't. We can't function like this. It's pure insanity, and unfortunately, there's more because these cases are not outliers. This is happening all across the country. It is particularly in and around inner cities. You can go find countless examples of activist judges, magistrates, prosecutors as well. They're working through legal loopholes. They're abusing mechanics of the justice system. And it's all to serve social agendas of equity and quote unquote criminal justice reform. If you hear criminal justice reform, either somebody's saying it ironically because they just don't know what they're talking about, or they're talking about advancing agendas that benefit violent criminals who are almost always they're not doing it for Timothy McVeigh, right? They're not doing it for the white dude. They're doing it for somebody who looks like them or somebody with their political ideology. So you see this too. There are judges out there who are of my pale skin tone, but they caucus with a certain political demographic. Probably can guess what I mean by that. They're leftists. And they're leftist communists, and they are using their position as judges, prosecutors, magistrates, etc., to let people off the hook because those poor people, they had to live around white people, and that's why they kill people. Which is wild because the other the white people who live around me, there's people of all color that live around me. None of them that I'm aware of are out committing violent crimes, whether they are white, black, brown, whatever. They got a nice fresh tan when they were on vacation in Florida while it was very cold. We had this cold storm the last week, whatever it was. None of them went out and were committing violent crimes, as far as I can tell, simply by virtue of being around white people. So I don't think that being around white people is the cause, because wouldn't white people be doing the same thing, and then we would need like the white judges to come in and be like, oh well, you're white and you were around. Like, we're not a virus that is causing you to commit crimes. People commit crimes because they commit crimes because they are sociopaths, they are dysfunctional, they are callous, evil individuals, and they go commit crimes, irrespective of their creed, of their race, their religion. But there's only a certain group of people who are getting special treatment by people that caucus with them or look like them. And this is, according to these activists in criminal justice reform, they're victims. They're products of a system that failed them, a system that for some reason doesn't affect everybody. Like, we're all in the system, but it's only affecting these couple people, like this fraction of the population. They've been marginalized, oppressed, discriminated against, et cetera, et cetera. But then you get then we have to answer the question of okay, well, why isn't everybody? I don't, everywhere I've gone. So, 14 years in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is extremely diverse. It was weird because I served all over the world with Marines of every creed and color, and the non-white Marines were not out committing violent offenses. They weren't. The Marines in general weren't. So it's, what was different about all these people? Were they not in the same system? And also, by the way, before you're like, you just don't know. You don't know. When I went to college, as big of a mistake that was, I majored in forensic psychology. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in forensic psychology. And what's interesting is, in all my research and years of schooling in forensic psychology, which is the intersection of psychology and the law, there is no evidence. It doesn't exist. It's made up. It's fabricated. It doesn't exist. There's no evidence that suggests that if that there's a disaffected group of people by the system, and that's why they create crimes. No, that's why they commit crimes. No, people commit crimes statistically because of things like fatherlessness, godlessness, right? But particularly families of single moms with no dad. If you don't have a father in the home, your likelihood of being a criminal offender of different levels, not necessarily violent crimes, but the likelihood of being a criminal offender is dramatically, it's like an order of magnitude higher. That is the actual correlation. It's not your skin color. It's not who you grew up next to, right? It's not your income level, because there's millions of people below the poverty line that aren't out committing violent offenses, right? Um, the number one factor is present and attentive parents, especially a mother and father dynamic, which means especially a father who is present in the household. So when you look at these offenders, and you can apply this to most, there's outliers, there's always outliers, but you can look at most criminal offenses. You can even look at, let's talk about the elephant there, the white mass shooters. Yes, there are white mass shooters. um, 9 times out of 10, the father is not present. Either he's not in the home, or he's there, but he's not actually present in the child's life. That is the actual correlation that you should be looking at, not the system, not skin color, not any of this other nonsense. How are they raised? How are they raised? What's their upbringing? Is their responsibility in the home? Right. Um, but I digress. These judges get into power. They get elected by crying about the system of oppression, the systemic or systematic racism. Their agenda is very simple. They're going to enact their vision of justice by helping criminals avoid punishment or avoid the full force of the law, avoid full sentencing as a form of recompense. It's a form of reparations. And these judges will tell you in their own words. Some of the judges, like I said, Judge Davis's social media, it's littered with her agenda of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And her stated mission, she states that she's there to give equity to people who look like her. And she openly declares contempt against the legal system, against America. That the system needs to be used to serve an agenda of being nicer to these violent criminals, including violent offenders, including one threatening her in her own courtroom. Or we could spend the entire episode reviewing case after case, diving into each judge, prosecutor. But I want to review something a little bit different, because you can be little internet sleuths and jump in and go look around at some of these cases. Um, let's talk about, sometimes there's not a problem with a judge exercising too much discretion. Maybe it's a little deeper than that. Sometimes the law itself is written in a way that produces outcomes that are shocking to the public. One of those laws could be that a guy like Thompson could get a 65-year sentence instead of life. But we're going to look at something actually even more insane. This came out of Alabama. A case called Ex Part Bodie. I think it's Bodie. Jeremiah Bodie is the defendant. He was convicted of one of the most serious crimes imaginable: the sexual assault, the rape of a child under the age of 12. Now, under Alabama law, that offense is among the most severe on the books. And the trial court, they treated it that way. The prosecutors argued that Bodie should receive a mandatory life sentence without parole. Again, bring back the gallows, but if we're not going to do gallows, like life without parole, close, right? Um, under the state's habitual offender law, he was entitled to this. He should receive a mandatory life sentence without parole because the state has a habitual offender law that says his past criminal history would warrant such, which is the opposite of the issue we've been talking about. But this is what it gets weird. When the court reached the Alabama Supreme Court, the dispute wasn't about whether the crime was horrific. Everybody said, oh, yes, this is horrible. The issue was technical, which is far more troubling. Alabama's sentencing law contains a list of crimes that are legally classified as quote unquote violent offenses. And what I'm about to explain to you applies in many states. So you can go look up different states that have this. Similar events have happened across the nation. The classification matters because it determines when certain sentence enhancements apply. And this would be a sentence enhancement of, because he has a criminal offender, repeat offender, mandatory life sentence without parole. That's an enhancement is what they call that. When the court looked at the statute, they found something surprising. The exact statutory offense Brody was convicted of was not included in the enumerated list of violent crimes in the state. In other words, the crime itself, the rape of a child under 12, was not specifically named in the section of the law that defined what counted as violent offense for that sentencing provision. And because of that, the court ruled that the enhanced sentence prosecutors were seeking could not be applied under the statute as written. Now, to be clear, the court did not say the crime wasn't horrible. They didn't even say it wasn't violent. What they said was that the law's wording was what mattered, and the courts cannot expand a statute beyond that because the legislature wrote it. To the public, this was surreal, right? And as I'm saying this out loud, it's crazy for me to even say this, but a man convicted of raping a child was, for purposes of that sentencing law, the way it was written, not legally categorized as having committed a violent offense. That disconnect between legal definitions and common sense moral understanding is exactly what erodes public confidence in the judicial system, right? So we have one case where we're releasing a repeat violent criminal. He goes and kills someone. Another case where somebody's threatening to, or saying that they would commit this violent offense to the judge. And she says, yeah, well, you look like me, so we'll let you out as early as we can. And in this case, they say, oh, well, it doesn't explicitly say that raping a child is a violent offense at the age of 12. So therefore, you can't tack that on. If the rape of a child doesn't qualify as a violent crime under the law, what possibly could? And to be clear, I don't think that the legislature meant to exclude that. But if the idea is that they forget something like that, and we cannot apply common sense to that and say, oh yeah, well, that it is a violent offense, so therefore, like, we can't do that. According to Alabama, you can't. Insanity. Just pure insanity. I don't know what else to say to that. The defenders of the ruling will say, correctly, that courts don't write laws and that legislatures do. Yes, correct. If the statute is incomplete or poorly written, the lawmakers must fix it. Also true. But these cases reveal a deeper problem that runs through many of the issues that we're talking about. And on one hand, we have incompetent or ignorant lawmakers who have turned elements of the legal system into bureaucratic swamps. They bog down or block common sense criminal justice. And on the other hand, we have this moronic social justice activist judges and prosecutors. Some cases, these are like malicious psychopaths who empathize with violent killers and rapists more than the society they've harmed. And thanks to incompetent lawmakers, those justices can continue their agenda mostly unabated. And it's unfortunate to say, but when this happens repeatedly, whether it's repeat offenders being released again and again, sentences being slashed despite jury recommendations, or violent crimes being classified in ways that defy common sense, people begin to lose faith in the system. Is the system even protecting them? And so you have to ask, like, what do we do? Well, stop voting for these idiots. Stop voting for these sociopaths who care only about their social equality agenda. Vote for common sense law, just application of moral law. Vote to put criminals in jail because that's where criminals go. Just that's it. Vote for that. And if you're looking for a third option, like, okay, be prepared to defend yourself. As an American, the government is not here to save you or help you. You should know that, right? Ronald Reagan famously said that, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And in this case, the government's not even saying I'm here to help. They're saying, well, actually, I can't help you because I'm an idiot and I can't write laws properly. So oopsie, or I'm a piece of crap and I support criminals because they happen to, caucus with me in one way or another. So, like, you have to defend yourself. You have to take care of yourself, which we're going to talk about more today. It's one of those things where, like, I knew I wanted to talk about this, but I didn't even know how to really approach it other than just diving in, because it's so insane. And like I said earlier in the monologue, you could stack these up and we could spend all day talking about them because it's unending. These aren't outliers. It keeps happening, and it's not even hard to find examples of them. And they all look the same. Like, the situations are slightly different, but the same thing keeps happening. And we don't have to live like this. We don't have to accept this. So, and on that wonderful note, let's get left of bang. I thought about something we want to talk about in Left to Bang as far as preparedness goes, and ironically, it fits well with the Irina Zarutska tragedy, and that is mindset, an aspect of mindset, specifically situational awareness. Something you should be doing, and if you're not, is on occasion, not incessantly, not obsessively, you should be running emergency response actions in your head when you're at home or you're out and about. You should think through, however briefly, whatever type of actions you might take in a given scenario. If there's some kind of emergency scenario that arises, it's commonly taught by emergency responders. You should rehearse or be aware of emergency exits. For example, if you're in a building, there's a fire or other emergency, you know where to go. If you went to public schools or even some commercial commercial buildings, there's fire drills. That's a thing, right? You get familiarized with what to do if a fire alarm goes off. If you've flown on a commercial airplane, same thing. You get an orientation to emergency exits, etc. So, that begs the question of why is it the overwhelming majority of us walk around in the world without any thought of being aware of our surroundings and the possibility of threats or what we might do if there is a threat? This applies in particular to those of us who conceal carry. Assumably, our goal is to be prepared to utilize a firearm in a hostile encounter where loss of life and limb is, reasonably assured. Better put, we carry a firearm with the express intent of being prepared to defend ourselves or others. But I'd wager that probably not many of us spend more than a few brain cycles, if any. When we approach an establishment or we enter a building or location, we don't really spend time, even a moment, considering surroundings as a potential battlefield. And the reason is simply enough the odds of a threat unfolding at the local Walmart or the gas station, they're pretty slim. The chances are low, but the chances are not zero. A few weeks ago, I made a comment that Walmart is not the streets of Fallujah. And in context, I was talking about open carrying and posturing with a firearm. But don't conflate the two. Don't be mistaken, because there's a difference between aggressive posturing and mindset. Um, in a combat zone, if you're on a patrol or you're preparing an assault, an attack, or if you're preparing a defensive position, one of the tasks that you would undertake is a review of your position. You look at avenues of attack, concealment, vantage points. You'd examine your location. You try to figure out where the best ingress or egress is for the enemy or yourself, which means entry or exit, if you don't know what those mean. Where might you advance or withdraw? Meaning, where are you going to come from? Where are you going to go? Kind of Joe. What are the vantage points? What are the positions that are most vulnerable to you or to the enemy? Now, to be clear, you don't need to do a full tactical analysis of the local grocery store. But something you should be doing anytime you walk into a new place and periodically when you revisit a location is consider some fundamental tactical and preparedness concepts. For example, are you familiar with the emergency exits? The doors, the front door, back door, emergency only. All these are potential entryways, right? Ingress, egress for the attacker or the threat. They could also be escape routes for you if you need to get out. And knowing those could be the difference between life and death. If you're in a department store, grocery store, let's say that you heard gunshots, an explosion, they're screaming, something that indicates a threat. Where would you move? For example, if there was some shooting across the store, is there an exit near you? Do you need to navigate to the exit? Do you have to get somewhere? If you are going to navigate to an exit, would it make more sense to run through the aisles or to traverse the exterior, the perimeter wall? In many cases, not all, but in many, you probably don't want to just go running through the center of the store. If you don't know who the threat is, where the threat exactly is, you don't want to just start running through, turning blind corners into a threat. Probably not. You might want to navigate the exterior wall so that you have your back to a safe wall while observing the situation as you move. Similarly, if you go to a restaurant, something that I try to do, pay attention. Do you pay attention to where you sit? Where's your seating position? I would say most people don't think about this. Most people don't consider the tactical disadvantage they're at if they sit down with their back or their side facing a door. If they're right near the doorway or the most crowded or highest traffic areas in a restaurant. And I would say that with few exceptions, your most defensible position is with your back to a wall, or your back to as few people as possible. Certainly not facing away from the main entryway or a side door. If a threat was to manifest, you want to have the cleanest visual. Not having to turn around and look. You certainly don't want to be right at the door with your back if someone comes in like shooting for God forbid, but that has happened in places, right? If you're facing away, if somebody comes in behind you, like what good are you doing, right? There's a large list I could go over. We could spend all day. We could do entire classes on combat mindset. What I would say is You don't need to overanalyze, don't hyperfixate, don't stress out thinking there's a gunfight at your next shopping trip. But when you go into a restaurant, be mindful of where you sit, so that you have general situational awareness. You have an easier time responding if something did happen. When you go to a store every once in a while, rehearse in your mind what you do if there's an active shooter situation. Just thinking about it and asking yourself these questions like, oh, what would I do? Where would I go? That's a huge improvement over zero awareness. By mentally rehearsing emergency actions, you're essentially priming your body to respond correctly, or at least somewhat informed. You prime your mind to respond to emergency with some level of confidence that you might not have had if the situation was completely unrehearsed. There's a reason that military and law enforcement rehearse tactics, and it's to build muscle memory. You don't have to physically drill or rehearse your response actions at Goodwill to have gone through a short exercise in your head. And by the way, I don't recommend doing like combat rehearsals in Goodwill. They're probably not going to like that. Just keep it in your head. Short, sweet, simple, to the point, right? These simple rehearsals could mean the difference between hesitation and right action. And that that difference could change the outcome in a life or death situation. So it certainly could, more situational awareness may have changed the situation for Irina Zarutska, had she positioned herself differently on the train. Even if she had still been stabbed, it might not have been in the back of in the side of her neck, right? It's a tragic example. It's a graphic example, but, think of the difference if she had been seated differently, if she had not, because she's a woman alone on a train. Had she seated herself differently so she could have seen a potential attack, put her hands up, she still got stabbed, maybe not been in the neck or the face, something like that, right? So these little differences can really matter, and you never think it's going to happen to you until it does, right? So be thinking about that. And with that, let's get to this week's sit rep. All right, let's start with the legal battlefield this week, because if you want to understand the future of the Second Amendment in America, you need to understand that the real fight is not in Congress, it's in the courts. Specifically, lower courts are currently trying to figure out what to do with the Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. If you don't remember the significance of the case, it changed the way gun laws are supposed to be evaluated in the United States. Before Bruin, courts used what amounted to a balancing test. Judges would ask whether a gun law serves some government interest, public safety, crime prevention, whatever the justification the state wanted to offer. And then they would weigh that against the individual's right to bear arms. And as you might imagine, when the government writes the law and courts decide whether the government's justification is quote unquote good enough, the government tends to win those arguments, like a lot. So the Supreme Court stepped in. They said, no, that's not how constitutional rights work. Just because the government likes something their way, that's not how this works. The court said that the Second Amendment must be evaluated through what they called a historical tradition test. In plain English, that means that the government, if they want to restrict firearms, it must demonstrate that the restriction is consistent with the historical tradition of firearm regulation in America, particularly around the time the Constitution and Bill of Rights were adopted. Now, pause right there. I love just that framing right there. If that's how the framing we actually went, we would all have Gatling guns. We would have merchant militia ships. And I think that's beautiful. We should have cannons. Put my grape shot in the cannon. Let's go. Let's do this. But in any case, this was supposed to avoid modern policy arguments, sociological studies, no emotional, just history. What did the founders intend and what was America doing? Like how is this meant at the time? Like in context, right? When you apply that standard, honestly, a lot of modern gun laws, they look very shaky, aka they're infringements, and they would go away, which creates the problem that we're seeing right now. So because the Supreme Court issued the ruling, the lower courts are the ones applying it. And many of those courts don't like where this standard leads, and it's pretty obvious they don't like it. So instead of applying the test faithfully, we're seeing something instead of legal, like instead of judicial process, we're seeing legal gymnastics, cases involving age restrictions, carry permits, what they call sensitive places, and even longstanding felon in possession laws are being interpreted in ways that stretch the definition of historical precedent far beyond recognition. In other words, courts are trying to thread this needle between following the Supreme Court's ruling and preserving modern regulatory structure that they've built over decades. That tension is now producing a growing list of cases moving through the federal system. One example is Wolford versus Lopez, which challenges Hawaii's attempt to declare that most private properties off limits for lawful concealed carry unless the property owner explicitly posts permission. So think about that. The default assumption then is that the law that your constitutional right does not exist unless someone else grants it to you. That's not how constitutional rights are supposed to work. In fact, that's not how they work, because that's not what a right is. That's a permission. But states like Hawaii, because again, they're run by moronic petty tyrants who want to disarm you, they're doing these experiments to see if they can get around the post-Bruin environment. And there's many cases like it: challenges to age restriction, magazine bans, sensitive places. What we're witnessing right now is this legal aftershock of Bruin. And eventually, some of these cases are going to make their way back to the Supreme Court. And when they do, the court's going to be forced to answer an important question. Was Bruin meant to be a transformative ruling that restores Second Amendment to its original meaning? Shall not be infringed. So yes. Or is it going to be slowly chipped away through this creative interpretation of the lower courts? Because the reality is constitutional rights don't disappear overnight. They almost never do. It's always erosion, narrowing, redefinition. They get redefined, and that happens almost always through the courts. Congress almost never does anything. Now, the state governments do, but then the courts take it up, and the courts just nod their head. Yes, we like this. Give me more of your lobbyist money. Take me out to dinner, and sure, it doesn't affect me. I'm a judge, so I can get a waiver and I can have my guns to defend myself because I'm a special person. But you plebes, the peasants, you don't need the weapons. You don't need any of that. The government is here to take care of you, right? But these judges, these courts, and these state governments, they think that they're going to determine if the Second Amendment is actually to be treated like a constitutional right or a permission slip. And unfortunately, in my mind, and what the court cases look like right now that are on the docket, that fight is far from over. Far from over. Speaking of fighting, let's talk about body armor. You've heard it said that firearms are the great equalizer, and they certainly are. But fighting equal or fighting fair is just being well prepared to lose a fight. And Americans fight to win, and this is why body armor is the second most critical investment you can make after a firearm. It's not your grandpappy's body armor, and gone are the days, or at least they should be gone, are the days of bulky steel slabs of armor. That's why at Invictus Templar, we're on a mission to ensure you're equipped with modern, lightweight, dependable U.S. manufactured armor. We've got options to meet every mission, every loadout, from affordable AR 600 to 700 steel up to level 4 ceramic, RF3 level ceramic plates. They weigh just over 5 pounds and they'll stop armor penetrator threats. Or perhaps you're looking for next generation of body armor like our Aegis special rifle threat plates, weighing in at 3.2 pounds a piece. That is paperweight, baby. Whatever your needs, we've got you covered. And before you ask, yes, we've got the plate carriers to match. Plate carriers that adjust and adapt to your mission. Your armor should move with you, not against you. If you've got a firearm to level the playing field, it's time to invest in the strategic advantage of next generation body armor. And you're not going to find better armor than ours, made right here in the United States of America. So check us out at invictustemplar.com. Check out our body armor collection. Again, that's at invictustemplar.com. Let's move from the courts to the cultural battlefield because there's more to do with New York. What a surprise. Something different. It's not policy, sort of policy, but it's messaging, it's narrative shaping. More importantly, it's the next phase of how this anti-gun movement intends to operate when bans are becoming difficult to pass, thanks to Bruin. New York lawmakers have introduced a proposal that require gun stores to display graphic warning signs about firearms. Not just informational notices, not safety reminders, graphic warnings. We're talking about imagery and messaging modeled after like what you see on cigarette packages, images of death, children's coffins, things like that. Emotionally charged visuals that are designed to provoke, elicit a reaction before you even step up to the counter. Now, on the surface, the argument being made is predictable. Oh, it's awareness. It's about safety. It's about informing consumers. Let's be very clear about what this is, because we've seen this we've seen this playbook before. It's not about information. It's about association. It's about taking a lawful product, something that millions of Americans own, train with, rely on for defense, and they're deliberately tying it visually and emotionally to death, tragedy, and guilt, not through data, not through debate, through imagery, because imagery bypasses logic. It hits instinct, and that's their point. The idea, they want you to have a visceral response to a gun store because the gun store is showing you that kids die because of guns. It's the strategy that they used against tobacco companies. They can't regulate it, or they don't just regulate the product. They don't just tax it. They don't just restrict where it can be used. They want to make it socially radioactive. You create this cultural environment where even being associated with it feels wrong. And that's exactly what's happening here, right? This is manipulation to the highest extent, and it's against your fundamental rights. And the idea is, if you can't eliminate gun ownership through legislation, especially post Bruin, the next thing, we'll just reshape public perception. We'll make people think that gun owners are just these despicable, satanic people who want to murder babies. That's what they did this during COVID too. Remember, if you did not get a COVID shot and you didn't get your 80 Fauci ouchies, then you wanted to murder children and you wanted to kill grandma, right? That's what they wanted. So they're doing the same thing with gun rights now. The gun owner, they want people to just recoil from them. They want they want the act of purchasing a firearm. You have to walk up to this place, you're going to purchase a firearm, and you want it to feel immoral, like you're contributing to death, right? When the reality is starkly different, because an unarmed populace, as we talked about last week with Iran, and you can see this through history, the unarmed populace is who gets butchered by the government, right? So who exactly is immoral here, right? But of course, it's always the inverse of reality with these petty tyrants. So the idea is that this is lawful retailer operating within the bounds of the Constitution. They're gonna put this government mandated display imagery to discourage customers. And here's something else though. This isn't just regulation. This is compelled speech. This is, you're being forced as an owner of a gun store, a pawn shop, whatever, whoever's selling the gun. You're being forced to broadcast a message you don't believe in. You're being forced to tell people that, oh yes, my business supports baby killing. Like, imagine if we did that with other, like, can we do that with Planned Parenthood? Because honestly, I think many of us would be willing to settle with this. Like, okay, you know what? I'll put the unrelated image of a baby coffin I will put up on my store if Planned Parenthood is required to put pictures of what abortion looks like. Let's do that. We'll make that compromise. I think every American will make that compromise. Every Planned Parenthood has to put up pictures outside their door of butchered baby fetuses. And then the gun stores will put up the child coffin. All right. Well, let's do that. Does that sound good? We make that deal. That a good deal? Damn fine deal. I make that deal, right? Um, you know, it it's so absurd. These people just, they don't shut up. They don't go away. And this is why we can never rest. We can never let this go because they're never going to stop. Um, you know, we have to stay concerned as anyone who values constitutional limits on government power, regardless of your stance on firearms. By the way, if you zoom out a little bit further, this is not an isolated idea. It's a shift. The focus used to be on bans, certain rifles, features, certain accessories. And then they hit legal roadblocks, and now they pivot. Now they're going to go to the cultural domain. The government is going to get involved in the culture. It's going to give you perception. It's going to create stigma. It's going to do social conditioning to get you to do what you want. And they do this everywhere. Like I mentioned COVID, right? And again, it's public health. Oh, this is public health. We have to let people know guns are dangerous for public health. Everything is always public health. It's always consumer awareness and public health. And it just coincides with the fact that it's what the government wants. Isn't that weird? Are we noticing something here? Are we doing the crow thing? We're noticing what the government's doing now. Weird pattern recognition going on. It's going off again. It's beeping. Um, so today it's guns. Tomorrow it could be anything. And that's the kind of precedent that doesn't stay contained. From a tactical standpoint, because that's what we do here. This tells you something important about the fight, and this is why we support organizations like the Firearms Policy Coalition. Um, we want to protect not just the rights and what you're allowed to own, but also how ownership is perceived, how it's framed, how it's presented to the next generation. Culture shapes policy just as much as policy shapes culture. If one side can successfully redefine firearms as inherently immoral in the public mind, the legal battles become much easier for the enemy down the road. So this is not just a strange proposal coming out of one state. This is a signal. This is a signal of a strategy that's evolving from restriction to stigmatization. Right, they're creating a stigma. That is what our community, the Second Amendment community, needs to recognize exactly for what it is. If you don't understand the battlefield, you're not going to understand how to fight it. So, with that, it's time to combat heresy. But first, if you're like me, you are probably a coffee drinker, or maybe you're like me years ago and you don't like coffee, or you thought you didn't like coffee because it tasted awful unless it was loaded with sugar or syrups. It turns out coffee doesn't have to be an acquired taste, and coffee doesn't need to be drowned in syrup to make it enjoyable. That's why every day, usually twice a day, I enjoy our very own coffee and Crusade right here. Small batch, organic, artisan roasted coffee. Yep, we did the cliche thing, veteran-owned brand with coffee, but we did it a little bit differently, meaningfully different as well. No artificial flavors or ingredients, no mass production, only organically sourced from sustainable and mostly family-owned farms. Coffee and Crusade is true small batch roasted by a master roaster with nearly 2 decades of roasting experience, and each blend is handcrafted by us at Invictus Templar. That means me. I get to craft them, and it's delicious. It's a fun process. Try our blends like Siege Engine Espresso, or our most popular Holy Fire Black and Tan blend. And even better, $1 from every bag goes back to charities that glorify God, such as caring for veterans, protecting the unborn, and defending our fundamental rights through Second Amendment advocacy. What are you waiting for? Try Coffee and Crusade. Try the coffee that gets us up and keeps us moving in the morning. Coffee the way God intended, all natural, fresh, and giving back to others. So give it a try at invictustemplar.com. That's invictustemplar.com. Coffee and Crusade. Now let's dive in and find out, is that heresy? I think you already know the answer. Let's close this week once again by dispelling heresy, and much as it was in the monologue, we're once again taking aim, no pun intended, at the government's arbitrary and dangerous use of its interpretive powers. This whole episode is basically about why the government sucks and wants to get you killed. This one's not about them wanting to get you killed, but a little bit different. A ruling, a judgment. Story broke this week. It really hit in the news this morning, actually. That this is going to be familiar. Like Groundhog's Day, Bill Murray Groundhog's Day. The ATF, along with some signals from the DOJ, once again, we're back to the idea that pistol braces might be illegal, even felonious to possess or use. Once again, depending on how they're interpreted. I know this is exhaustingly stupid. We're doing this again. So here we go. Not a new law passed by Congress, not a constitutional amendment, not even a regulatory framework, just a shift, new reinterpretation. We're right back to, well, this might make you a felon, depending on how the agency decides to read its own rules this week. It's like, I wrote this down, but I can't remember how it works. I don't know. And maybe next week it's going to be a little different. But this week you're a felon and next week you might not be. I don't know. Anyway, so the question we're asking, like every week, is this heresy? To answer that, we need to understand what's actually happening. So pistol braces, of course, not new. They were originally introduced as an accessory designed to help stabilize larger format pistols, such as pistol rifle type setups, right? Particularly for disabled shooters. The ATF reviewed them, they approved them, they reversed course, they partially reversed again, then they issued guidance, then contradicted that guidance, and then they attempted a sweeping rule change that would have reclassified millions of legally owned firearms under the NFA, the National Firearms Act. And now once again, for reals, for real, this time for real, again, maybe different tomorrow, same today, same tomorrow. I don't know. Different, but still same. We're seeing signals. The status could shift back into potential felony territory. So if you woke up this morning not a felon, you might be a felon later today or tomorrow. I don't know. Are they working tomorrow? They're going to publish guidance on a Saturday. Monday morning, you might be a felon. I don't know. Maybe Tuesday. Anyway, nothing about the physical object has changed. Same braces, firearms are the same owner. The only thing that changes is the government's interpretation. Somehow that interpretation is what determines whether a law-abiding citizen is compliant. Or are you a felon facing? Now you're really a felon today. That's right. Today you're a felon. It's kind of like, we were talking about earlier with the criminals. It's like, you're a violent criminal, but today I interpret it differently. Like this is I'm not George Washington would stack bodies over the stupidity of the modern day government. And it is only by the grace of God that like the majority Christian nation doesn't stand up and just refresh the tree of liberty. Like we're just exhausted at this point. Like I'm exhausted with it. It's so dumb. And unfortunately, like we have to talk about like the dumbness every week because if we don't, you're not going to know this kind of thing would happen. So I'm here to tell you this is happening so you don't accidentally go to the range next Wednesday at 2 p.m. and 10 seconds when the ATF says, haha, felon. It makes the definition arbitrary. But I would take it one step further. It's not just about inconsistency. It's about authority because quoting from the Second Amendment, but actually, let's say this. Here's what the Second Amendment does not say. It doesn't say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless a regulatory agency redefines a component. It doesn't say unless the configuration changes. And it also doesn't say, well, unless the accessory alters how the firearm is used or we don't like how it's used. It just says shall not be infringed. That's it. Full stop. Shall not be infringed, right? That's hard for people in government because the government doesn't like being told they can't do something. I don't know if you've noticed that. They really don't like that. When you tell them they can't infringe on something, it's like telling a toddler not to touch the stove is hot. Don't touch it. They're like, I want to touch the stove. Dad, you don't know what it. So it's like the Constitution's like, shall not be infringed. They're like, huh, that means I should try to find a way to infringe. That'd be great. Yeah. So the government doesn't apparently read English, which is not surprising. The collective IQ of our elected leaders is probably hovering between grapefruit and kumquat, if I had to guess. Setting aside a few true patriots who are there to do a real job and not just use it as a social media platform. But in any case, what they're essentially doing, they're trying to lump things like components, accessories, functional parts, anything that makes the arm usable, right? They're trying to lump all this in. It applies to, is it stripped down? Is it non-functional? It doesn't matter. So let's do a thought experiment. Let's apply this logic to another constitutional right. You have freedom of speech, but only with certain words. You have freedom of religion, but only in certain formats. You have the right to be secure in your property, but only if the government approves the lock on your door. This whole thing collapses under its own weight. Although you could make the argument that actually the government would love that. They would love you have freedom of speech unless you say something we don't like. Yeah, okay, that checks with the government. Yeah, so that makes sense. But they're trying to change how our rights are exercised, and firearms are no different. The brace is not a loophole. It's not a workaround. It's an accessory. That's it. And so, this is predictable. We saw this coming. It brings us back to the question, is this heresy? Yes, unequivocally, yes. It violates the core principle that rights are not granted by the government. They are recognized and protected from it. It replaces a clear law with shifting interpretation. Constitutional rights cannot be redefined at will. This is not just confusion or complexity. It's not regulatory nuance. it's heresy. And like all heresy, it's built on the idea that authority can redefine truth. In that case, the truth is already written, though, so it's not ambiguous. I'll say it again, shall not be infringed. And that is it for our show today. Don't forget that all gun laws are, infringements. Christ is Lord, and pick up some coffee, Crusade coffee. I'll see you next time. God bless, and peace be to you.